talk about absolute value. So in our interactive binder, there's a page for absolute value. If you need to pause and find it, go ahead and do that. But we've already talked about opposites, and I believe this is page 7. So absolute value has to do with how far away a number is from 0 on the number line. So it is always positive because it is a distance. Go ahead and highlight that. When I look at my number line here and I fill in my numbers, starting from negatives to positives, I'm always going to focus on that 0. So the absolute value of -4 means how far away is -4 from 0? It is 4 away. If I try another number, such as the absolute value of +2, how far away is 2 from 0? It is 2 away. If I try a third number, maybe I try -1. The absolute value of -1 is 1 away from 0, so therefore the absolute value is 1. When we write absolute value, we always put it in jail. So you see these bars we have here? That's how we note that it's the absolute value. Okay? When we turn to page 205 in our journals, we can look and explore a little bit more about absolute value. On the number line, it says plot the points on two numbers whose absolute value is 5. So what numbers are a distance of 5 away from our 0? Well, we can move to the right 5 and plot a point here, or we can go in the opposite direction to -5. So how do we find these numbers? Because we went both to the right and the left 5 units. And what we came to find out was 5 and -5 are opposites, and a number and its opposites have the same absolute value. Okay? Let's look at some of the next problems. We want to know whether this number sentence is true or false. So if I look at the absolute value of 9, the absolute value of 9 is +9. Does 9 equal 9? Absolutely, it's true. If we look at C, the absolute value of -9 becomes +9. Is +9 greater than -9? That's also true. And finally, the last one, the absolute value of -25 is +25. Is +25 less than 26? That is true. Go ahead and pause your video and try B, D, and F on your own, and then go ahead and play it for the answers. All right, let's see how you did. The absolute value of -4 is +4. Does +4 equal 4? Absolutely, that's true. The absolute value of -12 becomes +12. It is 12 away from 0. Is -12 equal to what we changed into +12? No, that one is false. And finally, the last one, the absolute value of -4 is 4 away from 0. Is 4 greater than 3? It is. Take a minute to look at the statement for G and pause your video. See if you can figure out what that one is before unpausing to find the answer. So this is an open sentence like we learned about earlier in the units, and we want to know if it's true or false. It is an open sentence because we have variables in here. Remember, Mrs. Myers taught you to use a positive number, a negative number, and 0. So if I put a positive number in here for x and say the absolute value of 2 is never equal to negative, and then x, which is 2, the absolute value of 2 is 2. The absolute value, or -2 is -2. Is 2 equal to -2? It is not. So that's correct. They can never be equal. Let's try the next one. If I take and I put a 0 in for x, so the absolute value of 0 does not equal the negative or the opposite of x, which is 0. The absolute value of 0 is 0. The opposite of 0 is just 0 because there is no opposite. Does 0 equal 0? Well, it does equal 0, so this is not correct because 0 does equal 0, and they said it could never equal it, but it does. So that's quite interesting. Let's try a negative. The absolute value of -4, we'll put that in there for x, can never equal the opposite of x. Well, x is -4. The opposite of -4 becomes +4. And the absolute value of -4 is also +4. Hang on a second here. We said this could never be equal to the right side, but it is, so that's not correct. So is the statement true or false? The absolute value of x can never equal the opposite x? Well, it is false because when 0 or a negative number are used, they are equal, aren't they? Interestingly enough. All right, let's move on. If we look at some of the situations down here, Lola ran out of money, so she borrowed $10 from her mom. I typically borrow from Mr. Myers' wallet, but shh, don't tell him. So if she doesn't have any money and she borrows from her mom, we want to know the balance of her debt. She owes her mom money, right? So she doesn't have any money. She currently has -$10. That negative is telling us that she owes someone money. If we want to know the magnitude or the size of what she owes, well, she owes her mom $10. So if she owes her mom $10, she doesn't owe her -$10. Her account or her amount that she has right now is -10. But because she owes her mom +$10, we have to take that -10 and put it in absolute value bars to show that she has to pay her mom back $10, not -$10. And once she pays her mom -$10, she'll be back to 0 balance. If we look at B, it says Dirk dug a hole that is 10 feet deep. So here's the ground, and he started digging, and he dug down 10 feet. Where is he in relationship to the ground? Well, he's at -10 feet. So his location right here is below the surface of the ground. If we talk about his magnitude or the size of the hole, he didn't dig a -10-foot hole. He dug a 10-foot hole. How do we make that -10 positive? By putting it in jail and making absolute value. So both of these are representing their location is -10 or their amount is -10. But when we want to actually talk about the magnitude of it or how much they owe $10. We use absolute value. They owe, the hole is 10 feet deep. Let's try a few more. Go ahead and pause as we look at journal page 207. Go ahead and pause and try your math message for number 1, and then unpause to check your answers. When we look at these, +2, is greater than a negative number. When we look at B, they're both negative numbers, so we look at the smaller amount. -3 is actually a warmer number. If we think temperature, then -5, or I'd rather only owe someone $3 than $5 because that means I have a shorter distance to get back to having positive money or a 0 balance. A positive number is always going to be bigger than a greater number, so we put the less than symbol in there. For the next one, when we change these to all positives if they aren't already positive, it switches my sign. When I change these to a distance, again, it switches my sign. And the last one, because these numbers are the opposite of each other, it makes them both positive. Therefore, it makes them both equal. If we come down to question 2 and we talk a little bit more about some different situations. Sean is 9 seconds behind the leader in a race. Kayla is 4 seconds behind the leader. The leader isn't behind anyone, right? So we're going to call the leader 0. This is the person that's starting. They're not ahead of anyone, or they're ahead of a lot of people, but they're not behind anyone. So they don't have a negative number. Because Sean is 9 seconds behind the leader, we're going to plot him here at -9. That negative is telling us he's behind. And Kayla is here at -4. Who is farther behind the leader? Well, it looks like Sean has a greater distance away, so therefore he is farther behind. Now, when we look at both of these equations or these inequalities here, the absolute value of -9 is +9. The absolute value of -4 is +4. 9 is greater than 4, I agree. If we look at the other one, -4 is greater than -9. So both are true sentences if I look here at this one as well. But because we want to know who is a greater distance and who is farther behind, that's a bigger distance, we have to use the absolute values in order to tell us who is a greater distance behind. We can talk about absolute value when using a distance below the surface. Here would be my surface, just like we did in the previous problem. Charlie is 300 feet underwater. We'll put him here. April is 500 feet underwater, so her location is -500. We use that negative to show that it is below the surface. Whose submarine is farther from the surface? Well, it looks like April has a greater distance. Again, because we're talking distance, we have to use absolute value to show that 500 is a greater distance. Even though it is a smaller number when we show it over here, it is a greater distance when we turn it positive. And finally, the last one's a little tricky. They did a fundraiser. The goal was to sell 500 packages. They missed the goal by 40 and by 20 in 2 different years. Now, typically, we would write this as a number line, and I think this is what makes the most sense. Our goal is 500 right here, right? They were 40 short, so that means they sold 460. We could plot 460 right here in 2012. Then, the next year, they were 20 short, so 20 short would be 480. Would it make sense to plot it just like this? Yeah, absolutely, we could. However, we're plotting it as absolute value, and we are using 0 for our goal. Just like we used 500 down here, we said instead of using 500, let's set the goal here at 0. And then if we're above the goal, we can make positive numbers. And if we're below the goal, we'll use negative numbers. So when they were 40 below their goal, they rewrote it as -40 instead of 460. And when they were 20 below the goal, they wrote it right here like that. So which year were they further from the goal? Well, that was 2012 because they were 40 away. They were only 20 away. We're talking about distances. Distances have to do with absolute value. Because the locations are negatives, we can turn them positive with absolute value.